Coming up on 5 Minute News. Trump criticizes Israel and calls Hezbollah very smart. Israel repeatedly bombs Gaza as humanitarian crisis worsens. And trillions of tons of ice lost as Antarctic ice shelves melt. It's Friday, October 13. I'm Anthony Davis. Donald Trump's Republican rivals denounced him yesterday for lashing out at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, days after Hamas's deadly attack, a rare moment in which multiple competitors directly criticized the GOP front-runner. Trump at a rally on Wednesday night said Netanyahu let us down just before the US killed top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. He also said Israeli leaders needed to step up their game and referred to Hezbollah, the group Israel fears may launch a large-scale attack from the country's north, as very smart. In an interview that aired on Thursday, he added to his criticism, saying Netanyahu was not prepared for the deadly weekend incursion from Gaza. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, another GOP presidential contender, compared Trump's comments to a foreign ally criticizing the U.S. in the aftermath of 9/11 or the attack on Pearl Harbor. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott said, "We cannot accept a single message to any of these enemies of Israel that U.S. and Israeli leaders are at odds." Trump is generally treated with a hands-off approach by his leading Republican opponents who are fearful of alienating his loyal base, but his criticism of Israel so soon after the attack underscores the extent to which the man most likely to take on Joe Biden next year is driven by personal enmity and resentments towards those who rejected his lies about winning the 2020 election. White House spokesman Andrew Bates called Trump's statements dangerous and unhinged, while the Israeli communications minister Shlomo Karhi told Israel's Channel 13 that he was shameful that a man like that, a former U.S. president, abets propaganda and disseminates things that wound the spirit of Israel's fighters and its citizens. Israel's government showed U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and NATO defense ministers graphic images of dead children and civilians on Thursday, saying they were killed by Palestinian group Hamas as it builds support for its overwhelming response to the attack. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office also released on social media explicit images of deceased children, part of an apparent effort to stoke global anger against the Gaza militants over Saturday's attack. Netanyahu has vowed to annihilate Hamas following its attack on unsuspecting Israeli communities on Saturday, which killed more than 1,300 people, the deadliest attack by Palestinian militants since Israel was founded in 1948. Meanwhile, in retaliation, the Israeli Air Force said yesterday that it had dropped 6,000 bombs against Hamas targets so far. For some experts in warfare, the number of bombs, 6,000 over the course of 6 days, was staggering. Israel is dropping in less than a week what the US was dropping in Afghanistan in a year, in a much smaller, much more densely populated area where mistakes are going to be magnified, said Mark Garlasco, a military advisor at the Dutch organization Pax for Peace and a former UN war crimes investigator in Libya. Israeli Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, the country's military chief, said yesterday, "Now is the time for war." Gaza authorities said more than 1,400 Palestinians, mainly civilians, including children, have already been killed and more than 6,000 wounded. A land invasion in the densely populated territory could send the toll much higher. In quotes published by Hamas, Deputy Hamas Chief Saleh al-Arauri said the plan was to target the army's Gaza team and fight occupation soldiers only. US President Joe Biden suggested on Wednesday he had seen images of children beheaded by militants. The White House later clarified that US officials had not seen any evidence of this. There were no images to suggest militants had beheaded babies, a particularly explosive accusation that first emerged in Israel's media and initially confirmed by Israeli officials. Netanyahu has not repeated the claim by his office earlier this week that Hamas had indeed committed these atrocities, nor did Gallant repeat that accusation to NATO ministers. Meanwhile, Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar said that Israel's decision to cut off electricity, water and food supplies into Gaza is not acceptable. He also said that due to Israel targeting civilians and cutting off civilian infrastructure, they were in breach of international humanitarian law. He said, "Well, I believe Israel has the right to defend itself, but they don't have the right to breach international humanitarian law. And I'm really concerned about what I'm seeing happening in Gaza at the moment," Leo Varadkar said. Yesterday, Israel's defense minister, Yoav Gallant, said Israel's army planned to wipe this thing called Hamas off the face of the earth. 4 dozen Antarctic ice shelves have shrunk by at least 30% since 1997, and 28 of those have lost more than half of their ice in that time, reports a new study that surveyed these crucial gatekeepers between the frozen continent's massive glaciers and open ocean. Of the continent's 162 ice shelves, 68 show significant shrinking between 1997 and 2021, while 29 grew. 62 didn't change, and 3 lost mass, but not in a way scientists can show a significant trend, according to a study in Thursday's Science Advances. That melted ice, which usually pens larger glaciers behind it, then goes into the sea. Scientists worry that climate change-triggered melt from Antarctica and Greenland will cause dangerous and significant sea rise over many decades and centuries. The biggest culprits were the giant icebergs breaking off in 1999, 2000 and 2002 that were the size of Delaware. The study also looks at ice melting from warm water below. Ice shelves are floating extensions of glaciers that act like the gatekeepers and keep the larger glacier from flowing more quickly into the water, the study's lead author said. All told, Antarctic ice shelves lost about 8.3 trillion tons of ice in the 25-year period, the study found. That amounts to around 330 billion tons a year, but the overall total is not the real story. The new study shows the deep losses, with 4 glaciers losing more than 1 trillion tons on the continent's peninsula and western side. 5-Minute News is an Evergreen podcast covering politics, inequality, health and climate, delivering independent, unbiased and essential world news daily.